Well, good morning. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Albert Putnam. He's a Holton High School graduate, now living in Brunswick. And I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, but thank you for agreeing to meet me this morning for an interview, Albert. And
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
would you mind by starting just to give a little bit on your background?
Sure. I grew up in Holton. I graduated in 1994 and went to University of Maine, graduated in 1998. I moved to Oregon, spent a few years out there, moved to Portland, Maine, and ended up circuitously back in Brunswick. And I'm a structural engineer now.
So talk about that a little bit. What does a structural engineer do? What does your daily job requirements look like?
Yeah, sure. So we're basically problem solvers. Most of what we do as structural engineers, while structural engineering is pretty broad, buildings, certainly Miami certainly has, you're hearing a lot about structural engineers going in to try to fix some problems as part of that search and rescue effort down in Miami. But basically what we do is we work for architects to design the beams, the columns, the bones of the building. It just so happens that we in our firm here specialize in houses, so single family residential.
Yeah, and when you say fairly substantial, I don't know if you can go into that a little bit more, and I'm sure you have to protect the confidentiality of your clients, but you've worked on some pretty impressive structures in your time. Can you give any more information about that?
Yeah, sure. So if you, Mr. Tweedy, want to build a house, you would hire an architect, and an architect looks after big picture stuff, a lot of the artistic end of things, if you will. So colors, shapes, sizes, size of rooms. Then you, the architect, would then come to always a structural engineer to help you put the bones of the building together. And some of these houses that we work on, yeah, they're fairly substantial. I can't get into the specifics of who we work for, but generally speaking, Maine is a destination for people to come here and build a second home. We've worked on plenty of big houses here in Maine, but also around the country, maybe 14 or 15 states. And so it's while some of these places might be fairly straightforward, and you might see a fairly modest place on Grand Lake, for example, some of these might be 40, $50 million houses in the ski slopes of Colorado. So it's all relative. It sounds funny, but to some of those folks, it's just a camp.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Maybe a bit of a different world, but at the same time, I assume you had to take some of your life experiences here and apply that, and you probably still do on a daily basis. So, can you go into a little bit more about how that's relative, your background and what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I do on a daily basis probably is just offer options to people to help them solve problems, right? And so somebody might want to build this big house, and the architect, for example, doesn't quite know how to build a wall of glass that's 30 or 40 feet tall, so you can sit on your sofa and look across the valley at the Rocky Mountains. And that's not something that maybe a junior in a math class at Holton High School knows how to do. But lo and behold, I guess if you just keep plugging away and learn a little bit in freshman geometry, and you apply that to a sophomore, and you apply that to your freshman math class in college, and before you know it, you just keep incrementally taking a little bit of what you learn and apply it to the next step. So I probably wasn't the greatest student if you interview any of my past teachers, but I guess I just always was curious about what was around the next corner. And I think if you're sitting in a class in Holton High School right now, it's sort of hard to think ahead as to what you are going to be doing. And you know what? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter how you get there. I think the important thing is that you just don't stop being curious, and that you just sort of wonder what's around the next corner. And during that process, don't be afraid to ask a question or two. We always say there's no such thing as a stupid question, and then we chuckle, but there really isn't. And so, it's great if you're that kid that raises their hand and asks a question, or just, take 10 or 15 seconds after class and ask a question. It may be that there may be something that you heard in class that day that didn't quite make sense to you. Ask your teacher. And at the end of the day, today as a structural engineer, I've taken 8 different math classes, and I probably at some point had to figure out how to calculate the rotation of a rocket after it was blasted off from a launch pad. I don't use that stuff today. I literally use 3 or 4 very basic principles. But what I do use really are life experiences that, when you just sort of lump it all together, if you learn how to stand up in front of a group of people, and that might be a couple buddies, or in high school, it might be an auditorium full of people in high school. It may be taking a geometry class. It might be learning how to plumb a sink. At the end of the day, you don't need to be a fantastic student, but what you need to do is just never stop trying to learn. And that may be that I guess the path that you take, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter if your education path takes you to Stanford University and biomedical engineering, or if your education is at the University of Maine or at the community college level, or if you see the local plumber when you're out at the elm tree and you say, hey, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do, but I've heard that a plumber makes a good living. Can you help me to figure out how to, can I volunteer for you for a Saturday to go check out one of your projects? That actually is an education, right? It's all relative. So I think it's important for people to not necessarily think that they need to be on a specific trajectory. I think that it's good to have goals, but I think that at the same time, you just need to always be inquisitive and never stop learning.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we talk a lot about lifelong learning, but you're a great example of somebody who has to apply that, because I think it's sometimes very easy for us to talk about it, but to hear someone who applies it, I have to assume in listening to you that some of the courses you took, whether it be in high school or the University of Maine, some of those basic principles, the math that goes in with your engineering, that's not going to change. However, the structures that you're working on, I'm sure look very different now from when you began your career. So you have to continue as a lifelong learner. You can't just say, all right, I've learned everything. I'm done with my formal education. That's it. You're still learning just as much as what you were when you were in school.
Yeah, you do for sure, and it changes. Sort of the challenge of the job changes, right? And so when I first, I guess, graduated from college, it was head down, running calculations all day, just sort of continuing with just developing it in my bones. And so it's no different than taking a high school class, right? Why the heck do we need to do our homework every day? It's not that you're going to use all that stuff. It's not that you're going to have to recall a specific equation. It's that you're training your brain how to learn. And so when it comes time to get a job, whether you go to college or not, the person who is interviewing you, the only thing they really care about is that you want to learn, or that you know how to learn. And so probably the most important thing that I guess anybody can bring to a job, and regardless of what you do, it doesn't matter if you're an engineer, or if you are a nurse, or if you are a plumber, or if you're a teacher, or if you are a captain in the Army. There are 2 things I think that we all just need to, I guess, try to get better at throughout our life, and that is, or I guess never forget, and that is that we're in the customer service business, right? Like we all are. It doesn't matter what we do. We always need to sell an idea. For me, I need to provide 6 or 8 different options to an architect who I'm sitting down with to describe how they might put their building together, or how they might make it look better or more elegant. You as an educator, you need to motivate students to help them to understand that there are plenty of options out there in the world. If you are a captain in the Army, you need to sell an idea to the crew of guys who you're managing to help make sure that everybody that you succeed in that mission, and everybody gets out of there safely. So, we're really all in the customer service business, regardless of what we do.
Yeah, so true. Um, the last topic, and it's a common theme throughout these interviews. The last one I want to cover is on the topic of failure. I remember reading something before you and I had a chance to meet. I read something though in a magazine. You were out west somewhere, I think Colorado, Wyoming, somewhere out there, and somebody had created plans, and then they found out that the homeowner, the architect, came to you and they wanted to put some big heavy piece of art. I think it was like
Yeah.
4 or 5 tons, and so you had to figure out. So failure in that case, it has some very serious consequences. However, failure isn't something we can be afraid of, right? Because if we do
Sure.
that, we'll never achieve anything of significance. At least that's my own personal thoughts. Can you talk about any experiences you've had with failure, and what your views are of it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that one story you're referring to, fortunately, there was no failure on our end. I'll get to a failure story in a second, but in that particular house, actually, I just saw that house published. I don't know if I can share my screen or not, but I saw a really cool photo of that house that we built in Ohio a few years ago, and we had most of the house framed up, or the contractor, because we don't build it, we just design it. The contractor had most of the house framed up. It was a pretty substantial steel structure,
Mhm.
and huge art collection. And the architect called over the weekend and said, the owner has purchased a piece of art, and it weighs 28,000 pounds, and he'd like to place it on the second floor in the main stair hall. And I sort of looked at my shoes and said, "Not on that floor, buddy." We designed it for a fairly substantial load, for miscellaneous pieces of art, but not 28,000 pounds. So, we had to go into some calculations, and we had to find some pretty big beams nearby. And we came in, and, within 2 or 3 days, we actually had a steel design assembled. We sat down with the steel fabricator, the contractor. We actually cut open the ceiling. We jacked some beams up into place. We welded. And, within 4 or 5 days, we were ready for it. And the reason we were able to do that is because we learned how to communicate with each other. We learned how to talk to each other. And that really is the key. You just got to learn to engage with people. But when you talk about failure, I think it's just not important to dwell on it. Yeah, I think it's easy to say, geez, I screwed up today, and to sort of look at your shoes and get down in the dumps. But that doesn't produce good results if you dwell on the fact that you screwed up. Everybody does. This morning when I was filling my cereal bowl, I spilled some milk on the counter. I wiped it up and I moved on. That's, to some people, that might be a failure, but you just don't dwell on it, move on, and don't think about it. As you think about trying to be a well-rounded person, and trying to, not only trying to be a good student, not only trying to be a good public speaker, talking to the person next to you in the line at the grocery store, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to need something from that person or that person's neighbor at some point. And so go out of your way to, I'm deviating from failure here for a second, but go out of your way to make sure that you open the door for people, and that you're respectful and respectable, because it's just like Holton, it's a pretty small town. You can rely on anybody to do anything for you, literally. It's because they know that they can rely on you at the same time, and that applies statewide, that applies nationwide, that applies around the world. And when it comes time to needing to get stuff done, it doesn't always matter, or it doesn't really. It's not what you know, I guess, right? It's who you know, and can you figure out a way to solve the problem? But to, I guess, back to your failure question for a second, I tried out for a musical, and I was in a couple in high school, and I can't sing now, and I couldn't sing then, looking back at it. But nobody told me that I couldn't. I mean, maybe I wish maybe that they had told me that I couldn't, but but I was in a couple musicals, and I remember specifically standing up in front of the auditorium full of people, and it's like 3 or 4 nights, and everybody's family comes, and there are several hundred people in the audience, um, and I, for like 30 seconds, I went blank, and I couldn't remember the lines to this particular song that I was singing, right? And nobody came up to me after the fact and said, "Well, you really screwed up, Putnam. You must be embarrassed, huh?" They all just slapped me on the back and had a good chuckle. And if I entertained the audience that night, that's great. That clearly was a failure, right? But what I did learn was how to stand up in front of a group of people and be comfortable and relay to deliver some information, right? And so, given that experience, that just prepares you to do the same, to be communicative in college, for example. It prepares you to be an employer. It prepares you to give a presentation, at your first job, for example. And a couple of years ago, I got a call from an architect who said, "Hey, we've got this small, quiet job. Can't tell you a lot about it, but I'll send you some drawings, and we'd like your firm to do it." So I said, "Sure, we'll take a look at it." As an architect that we do a lot of work with. And then I got a call from the Secret Service, and so it raised my eyebrow, and I said, "Oh, I think I know who we're working for here." I didn't know which one at the time, and within a couple of weeks, we actually don't meet all of our clients, but this particular client was kind of a nuts and bolts guy, and he wanted to know the process and what it was that we were going to do in order to build an office. And so, within a couple of weeks, I was standing in front of the President of the United States, describing for him how we were going to build him an office and what the process would look like. And you can't quite draw a straight line between that and standing up in front of a group of people making a fool out of yourself, and Holton High School, but they were related. And what I needed to do was, in a fairly short amount of time, describe to this fairly important person, using as many descriptive words as I could in the smallest amount of time, to add value to his day. And there it was. That was customer service. It was math, and it was science, but it wasn't equations. It was condensed down to, "Sir, this is what we're going to do for you to solve this problem." And he was thrilled, and he is today. Taller than I expected him to be, actually. But it's when I was at Holton High School, I didn't plan to do that. But here we are doing it, and that's probably the most important thing to remember. Don't sweat it. Don't feel as though you need to have your plan together. Just worry about becoming a well-rounded person, and don't be afraid to talk to people, because there's a pretty good chance that that person is gonna offer you a job, or is going to add value to your life in some way. So get out there, travel, go camping, go to the Wilderness Pines campground in Monticello, go to Yellowstone National Park, get out there and do it. Go fly fishing, go to Baxter State Park. Just don't stop, right? Just become a well-rounded person, because it'll be good for you in the long run.
And it seems like, while life experiences certainly are very important, it's what happens next is what you tend to focus on, right?
Oh, you got to. I mean, you can't dwell on the fact that you spilled milk on the counter this morning, right? Clean it up and move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I think we could talk all morning. I thank you very much for sharing some of your life experiences, telling a few tales from back in the day, and
Sure.
How a small town kid can go and stand in front of the President of the United States and talk to them about what it is that they know and how they got there. So, Albert Putnam, thank you so much for.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we'll see you in Holton this weekend, buddy.